Hey Untold Radio Network fans, want exclusive perks and to support our channel? Introducing our YouTube membership program with 3 amazing levels. Get loyalty badges that level up to different cryptids the longer you're a supporter. How cool is that? You'll also get access to custom Bigfoot emojis and priority in chat. Upgrade to Backstage Pass for exclusive wallpapers, photos, status updates, discounted books, and merchandise. Go all in with the producer level for everything mentioned plus member shoutouts. Ready for an enhanced experience? Join now, pick your membership level, and let's make this journey even more exciting together.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Mysterious Library on the Untold Radio Network. Tonight, we're looking at a very interesting blog post from Norio Hayakawa. Hayakawa is one of the most veteran UFO researchers in this country. He recently starred in a documentary where he was the titular subject called The Conspiratologist, which you can watch on Vimeo, and which Jason and I broke down on this show. We're both big fans of that movie. We've also had Norio Hayakawa on the Untold Radio Network on the other show that I do every Saturday night on Talking Weird. So go and check out that interview if you're interested. Anyway, this fascinating blog post, which I believe Jason is going to read some of tonight, or you can go and check out on Norio Hayakawa's blog, is titled Why Paranormal Phenomena and Real UFO Sightings Cannot Be Photographed with Clarity, if at all. So that's what we're going to be looking into tonight on Mysterious Library.
Good evening, or if you're listening on podcast somewhere later, good afternoon, good night, good morning, happy noon, Merry Christmas, whenever. It's always 5 o'clock somewhere, I suppose.
And it's not the truth.
How you doing, Dean?
Good, man. How you doing?
I can't complain. Can't complain at all.
I'm kind of sad. Summer seems to be slipping away. I never used to be conscious of it in Sydney, Australia, because it just seemed to be this perpetual cycle of hot weather, then slightly cooler weather in the winter. And everyone would be saying how cold it is, when here it would be t-shirt weather in Wisconsin. But here, when you start to slip towards that second half of July, you're like, summer's kind of passing me on by, baby.
Well, okay, so being as I'm a little further south than you, that's not quite the feeling I have. But that being said, I think my kids go back to school in like 3.5 weeks, if that. So I definitely do see the calendar counting down more. Like I said, it doesn't start getting cold here, or I say cold. It doesn't start cooling off until October. It may get less hot in the beginning of October, but up until and around mid to late October, it doesn't really cool off here. So You know?
we've still got some heat. We've still got some heat here as well. It's just the time you're aware is slipping by. Like, as you said, kids go back to school.
Yeah.
Before you know it, Labor Day weekend's here, and then sure, the weather's still even okay up here, but the summer's toast. I always think of that Eric Church song, Springsteen, where he sings about another July Saturday night, and every July Saturday night that passes me by, I'm like, I'm that much closer to summer. So,
yeah, no, it's fair. Like I said, I get what you're saying. It's just, again, summer winding down in Texas is a very, very different thing. We all kind of look forward to it because it's like, oh, good, we don't have to die if we go outside. Although I will say this, as a 5th generation Texan, I really am getting really tired of hearing people talk about how hot it is, because it's like, look, it's Texas, it's summer. If any of this comes as a surprise to you, I can't help you. It is hot every year. Like, oh, it's hotter than usual. No, it really isn't. I was literally born on what is still the hottest year on record. So no, screw it. It's like, I get it. We've got this weird thing going on. So the humidity is higher. So it feels warmer than usual this time. But I'm sorry, it's really not that much hotter than it has been in the past. I've been in Texas my whole life. I've been in East Texas. I've been here in North Texas, most of it. It's summer in Texas. Buckle in, kiddo. I don't know what to tell you. It gets this hot every year. This should not come as a surprise. If, I'm sick and tired of hearing about it. I really am. It's like, look, I get that it's hot. I know how hot it is. And if you're surprised, then maybe there's something else going on. You should see somebody about it. That's all I'm saying. It's like, do you get surprised the sun comes up every day? Are you surprised that there's taxes? I mean, I don't know what to tell you.
No, I understand. It's always fun to have a rant about those people who see doomsday coming because we have a warm day. Speaking of funny comments and the like, though, Horace Smith, Professor Emeritus of Astronomy and Physics at Michigan State University and a regular viewer of our show and also a guest sometimes here and on Talking Weird, says, I have my camera ready in case something weird happens during this episode, because tonight, of course, what we're going to be chatting about is Norio Hayakawa's most recent blog post, which makes it clear something many of us comment on in this field, that it seems there is something which makes it difficult to get a decent photograph of anything in the Fortean field: UFOs, dogmen, Bigfoot, ghosts, Virgin Mary apparitions, you name it. There isn't a whole lot of fantastic photographic evidence.
So I'm going to go ahead and read the article, but before we do that, we have one thing to run for y'all. But we're going to actually read this article because it's rather short. So I would like to give y'all a chance to actually hear what Mr. Hayakawa is saying in his own words, and then we'll talk about it, because I do have one or two points that both are a pushback and yet also, in many ways, are actually validation of his overall claim. But before we do that, let us talk about. Let us reload the SquatchCon virtual convention that's happening shortly.
Are you ready to uncover the mysteries of Bigfoot? Join us for SquatchCon Idaho 2023. This year, we're bringing the magic directly to your screen, or join us in person. Witness the world premiere of the enhanced Paul Freeman Bigfoot footage. Doug Hychek discovered a secret within this enhanced video you'll have to see to believe. Hear from an all-star panel of Bigfoot experts like Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, Cliff Barackman, Brian King-Sharp, and Michael Freeman. But that's not all. Get exclusive online bonuses such as Bigfoot-themed wallpapers, a Bigfoot coloring book, an interactive Bigfoot quiz, Squatch Nut Field Guide, get a copy of the Freeman Bigfoot Files ebook, and more. Whether you attend in person or watch it live online, you'll be part of an unforgettable experience. Don't miss out on this unique opportunity. Secure your spot today. SquatchCon Idaho 2023. Step into the unknown.
There you go. this is a really exciting thing that's happening. This is a new type of convention where if you're not in the Idaho area, you're like, well, I can't go. Well, now you can. Now you can. This is the future. You're going to be able to hear and engage with a convention, even if you can't attend physically. I think it's a great thing. And yeah, it comes with coloring books. How, like, that's got to be a plus. It's worth it just for the coloring book.
That looks great. I'm going to go virtually. I'd love to take a trip to Idaho, but I don't think that's in my immediate future. Take a virtual trip.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, sadly, I too am landlocked for the foreseeable future. But let me go ahead and get with Mr. Hayakawa's article here. Again, this was published on July 12th. There's a link in the description below. Dean was very kind enough to post that. Mr. Hayakawa says, I've spent a large part of my life, i.e. since around 1961, studying about my favorite topic, the mystery of the UFO phenomenon. Next year, 2024, I will be 80 years old. All I can say is the mystery is still unsolved and will remain unsolved until some day in the future, the entities themselves, or whomever is manipulating this phenomena, decide to openly reveal their true identity first. The government will never disclose the true nature of the phenomena because it is still totally baffled by it. Until then, the government will remain incapable of explaining it to the public. Despite all my years of research, I have yet to see any clear, credible photo of this phenomena. And I have viewed thousands and thousands of photos as well as video footages. Many of these photos are grainy or blurry photos of what could be anything. And this applies to either type of phenomena, which I categorize as paranormal. But I have no doubt that paranormal phenomena exist. Are paranormal phenomena deceptive in nature? For example, in 1950, there was an amazing UFO incident that took place in Farmington, New Mexico, where hundreds of residents witnessed an incredible aerial display and maneuvering of hundreds of silver disc-shaped objects in broad daylight, which lasted for about an hour during each of the 3 consecutive days, March 15, 16, and 17. Yet, as of today, no credible photo of that event has surfaced, not even one. On March 13 of 1997, hundreds of citizens in Phoenix, Arizona witnessed a slow flight of a large, dark, silent triangular object over their city from around 8 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Some describe it as V-shaped rather than triangular, with some fixed lights in the wings. Those who claim it was triangular said it appeared to be somewhat transparent, except for the fixed lights at each of the angles of the triangle. It was reportedly seen passing over the city at an incredibly slow speed of about 5 to 10 miles per hour. Yet, as of today, there are no credible photos of that object, not even one. All we have seen are ubiquitous photos and videos of flare-like lights that appeared around 10 p.m. near the sky above South Phoenix, which had nothing to do with the 8 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. event. Why? On October 13, 1917, there were more than 20,000 persons gathered at Fatima, Portugal. They were all expecting to see a miracle in the sky, as foretold by a shepherd girl who had been contacted by an entity in white who foretold her that there will be a miracle over Fatima on October 13. October 13 started out as a rainy day. Thousands had umbrellas on them. But after the rain stopped, there were many in the crowd who claimed they saw a dull, gray, disc-shaped object doing all kinds of strange movements in the sky. Many claimed that the heat was almost unbearable as the object appeared to be closing in over the crowd. In fact, many claimed that they were fearful the object was going to descend and crash on the crowd. Yet there is not even one credible photo of that event in the sky, despite there being some journalists and photographers among the crowd. Not even one. Why? I cannot help but conclude that real UFO sightings are paranormal events and that they cannot be photographed clearly, if at all. As I stated before, paranormal events could be deceptive in nature. My thought is that it is quite possible that they are manipulated by deceptive entities. Perhaps these manipulative entities, whoever or whatever they may be, could be testing our beliefs or convictions. These manipulators themselves may be using our beliefs and convictions as a psychological weapon of some sort, brainwashing some of the public that we cannot rely on proofs, but on real convictions alone. Perhaps our belief in convictions to them are more important for some strange reason or other. Could they play an important role in the events to come in the near future?
It's a good piece.
It's a great piece. And like I said, normally we don't read the entire thing because a lot of the times we're doing books or documentaries or articles that are 18, 20 pages long, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is why there is so much crammed into this particular piece that Mr. Hayakawa is puts here that needs to be explored and are regularly avoided by many in the community, whether it's the UFO community or paranormal, etc. And I want to respond to Overbuilt real quick because he's not wrong, and this is one of the comments I was going to make, because there are good photos of some Fortean phenomena. This is where I will draw a line between Fortean and paranormal. Right?
Or is it hoax phenomenon? Just quickly.
Well,
I hate to say
I'll play with it, but give me a second here. He's being very specific in talking about paranormal phenomena, right? There are photographs of material that I think the reason it is as clear as it is that it's not paranormal. It is something physical. Unfortunately, I can't talk too much about it, but there are photographs of a Bigfoot creature it's clearer than Patty. That's as far as I can say. And there's enough around to say that this photo is credible. That having been said, for every one photograph of something that is, reasonable, as soon as you step into that something that's more paranormal, you cannot capture this stuff with any real viability. Right? Anytime where there's anything where you can say, okay, this is a legit photo, it's of a thing, but it's like, but what can we do with this thing? What data can we actually draw from it that is useful in a scientific manner? And the problem is nothing at all. And his broader point, though, and he's connecting this with the UFO phenomenon, is he talks about true UFOs. And I think there's an interesting distinction that he's making between a true UFO and the implication is material created by the government, right, as an experiment. I think that's pretty, or some technology is being developed. I think that is an underlying concept in this article that he's focusing, because he is focusing on the UFO thing or the paranormal aspect of it. I think he's making an interesting delineation here, saying, look, there's some stuff here, right, that is government manipulated, government created, human technology, but then there's this other phenomena. We've talked about this a lot. There's this other phenomena that doesn't neatly fit into any category, and its behavior is so weird, so erratic. When we do get photographs or images or videos of them, it doesn't properly catch it. It is out of focus. It is blurred, or it destroys or damages. Again, there was a comment about whether or not some of these things are affecting electronic devices, right? Again, every Bigfooter I know, every paranormal expert I know, every researcher I know has this story of when we went out and the batteries died. Just everything was fully charged, they're all gone. Or we put up this camera trap and everything's fine, but these photos, when we were during the time frame when we're having this encounter or this thing's moving around our camp, we have 3 or 4 or 1,000 images, but they're all screwed up. And then everything's fine after that, right? We all have this same, everyone who's been in this field for any length of time has that story. So I think he is saying, look, that's the same. What's going on there is the same thing that's going on with some of these what he calls true UFOs.
Yeah, I don't think it's a popular position to take, but I'd go even a step further to suggest because we have such difficulty capturing genuine paranormal or 14 phenomenon again and again and again, that photos and video, the rare instances, including the Patterson Gimlin film, that look convincing are most likely hoaxes. Because otherwise there wouldn't just be a couple of unicorns when we've got thousands of people with cameras, events where thousands of people saw them and no photographic or filmic evidence. And of course, I do place Bigfoot in the same category as I place all of these things. And people can disagree and say it's a physical ape man or whatever. And then we can have a discussion about why don't we have a body and why don't we have more footage if people are seeing this ape man all the time. But I do think it's worth considering that if, as a whole, it's so hard to to capture this stuff, just like Norio's talking about. And yes, definitely, there's real photos of real UFOs. Things like the Tic Tac video, although they might be hoaxed, I don't even know, by the government. But certainly there is, as you mentioned, I would say footage of genuine test crafts. But there aren't any photos of more anomalous things. When we see more anomalous weird stuff, and I can think of several examples which have proven to be hoaxes, the Billy Meyer photos, the Gulf Breeze photos, much of the Adamski footage, the things which really were kind of, my goodness, almost any serious researcher sits on the side, even the people who believe extraterrestrials are visiting, that kind of stunning photography, most people say they're hoaxes. And what's produced instead are these blurry lights in the sky or something. So the question then becomes, I think, then what are people seeing and what are people experiencing if it is so difficult to capture a genuine image of these things? Because I don't think people aren't experiencing all types of different paranormal phenomena, which might all be the same thing manifesting differently. Then the question, of course, becomes, is the experience itself anything like what even the experiencer thinks it is? And John Keel talked a little bit about this, quite a bit about it, actually. And I think it's worth looking back at some of the people that were cognizant of these problems going back all the way to the 60s and 70s. And that is, if you saw somebody who was undergoing a UFO experience, would they just be staring into space and nothing would be there? How much of this is just something that people are perceiving through an altered reality or an altered lens, that it isn't physically real anyway? And sure, some experiences probably there is some physical reality to it, but maybe the projected image can't be captured anyway. And that goes to things that Valet was saying, the idea that the real technology might be behind you, like the projector in a cinema in the dark, and what you're seeing is just something that the technology is throwing out there. And whether it's throwing out there at a psychological level, or it's throwing out there at a holographic level, or it's throwing out there at some type of a continuum somewhere between those 2 points, that might mean that inherently this stuff isn't photographable. And it's interesting that throughout the history of the paranormal, there are all of these photos, and the further we're removed from it, generally we can look back and say this is a hoax. Like if you look at most of the spirit photography of the late 19th, early 20th century, and some of it's genuinely spooky because of how they captured it.
Oh, yeah.
Most people today will just go, that's a double exposure, clearly. But at the time, when there was a lay people who didn't understand how double exposures and the like worked, you could sense it was like having Photoshop almost back then, before anybody knew that there was a Photoshop. You could trick people with that type of imagery, and there's a hazy figure there next to my, next to my grandmother, so it must have been granddad's ghost or something. So the whole history of capturing this type of phenomena, be it UFOs, Bigfoot, whatever, like I said before, it's interesting that Fatima's in his article, because again, why don't we have photos of any of these Virgin Mary apparitions, really? Because that's another thing which people see en masse sometimes.
Yeah,
I think points to the fact that as Norio suggests, whether the phenomenon is intentionally deceiving us, like he suggests, and maybe wanting to test our beliefs and test our expectations or whatever else, which very well may be the case, it might be that the phenomenon is so inherently different to what we think we're seeing, that the very concept of capturing it on film might be above and beyond us, to be frank.
Yeah, I want to end at his conclusion, because that he asks a very interesting and intuitive question that I think, again, is often missed, because we get locked into this mindset. But I want to take a step back in it, where he basically comes out and says he doesn't think the government has any clue as to what the genuinely unusual UFOs are, right? He's flat out saying I don't think they know what's going on here at all. And I find that really interesting, because we were locked into this idea that the government knows, the government understands, right? But as we've talked about a lot on this show, it's very, very clear that this idea sort of emerges in the very late 70s, early 80s, because the government agents want us to think that. We see that there's that.
Just quickly, Kehoe was saying in his books in the 1950s, he was saying they
Mhm.
know it all. We need disclosure back then.
Yeah.
So but you're right. As we become more paranoid of the government, I think more people
Mhm.
are suspicious of it. But it has
Rightly
been
so.
almost as old as we believed in the extraterrestrial hypothesis, is this belief that the government knows and just aren't telling us.
Right. And you're right about Kehoe. But again, from an ad nauseum sort of in mass belief that the government actually understands what's going on, this is a belief that was created in many ways by the government itself, which begs the question of, well, maybe that's also part of the psyop. They want us. There's this belief that, okay, well, they know what's going on, at least, so it's at least somehow under control, even if they're like, yeah, we don't know what the hell this is, right? Like, that was weird. I don't know what's going on with this. What's happening here? And one of the things I want to push back on is there are instances of paranormal events that are caught on camera. But to his broader point, my thing is this: he's right in that, again, none of the photographs we have are necessarily definitive. Now, again, he's focusing more on UFOs. I think I don't want to go too far afield on that, because there's a photograph I talk about a lot that is remarkably interesting, but mostly it's because of the story behind it and the changed lives around the photograph. But the point is, he's talking about UFOs and saying, look, if we can't get a good picture of a genuine UFO, right, one of these things that's truly anomalous, we got to ask ourselves some big questions here that makes it paranormal. And he's asking a question that a lot of UFO researchers just don't want to ask, because it is uncomfortable for them, because it goes, hey, maybe this stuff isn't what you think it is. Again, what if the behavior, again, is some of this stuff purely psychic in nature, meaning we can't physically observe it, but because we are supernatural beings ourselves, we are perceiving it? Or again, is it just there is something physically there, but the nature of it is so strange, the cameras, from an objective perspective, it's like the camera can't make heads or tails of it, because it's something else that is beyond it's outside of our current technological understanding. And this is something that I think you talk about quite a bit, and I think you're onto something when you talk about the simulation theory. I know you're not a simulation theorist per se, but as a metaphor, saying, hey, maybe the real problem is the nature of our reality isn't what we think it is. And whatever these things are, they may be a part of that system in a very different way. And that's what's limiting our ability to objectively observe it.
Yeah, I think people who have looked at it beyond the obvious extraterrestrial science fiction interpretation have come to similar conclusions. Like Jacques Vallée considered UFO sightings or the UFO phenomenon part of a control system, which manipulated our belief system for whatever reason. And he suggested there might even be some type of human agency. Agency not necessarily meaning an alphabet soup agency like the CIA or something, but just some human organization or group that might be manipulating this belief system to, in effect, have a broader social, cultural impact. And Norio Hayakawa, God bless him, is clearly part of that type of new ufology, which emerges in the early 1970s with people like Keel and Steiger and Vallée, who were conscious. All of them. I mean, you've got to remember too, Keel and Vallée were both saying the government don't know what this is.
Mhm.
that they're as dumbfounded as
Yep.
we are. They know nothing. And part of the reason they probably like the idea that they know is because what's scarier, that the government has the bodies at the basement of Area 51 and they know what's going on, or that the government have no idea what is happening. To the average person, I mean, I'm not scared that they don't know, but to the average
Yeah.
person, what's better to know? Oh, good old Uncle Sam knows everything. He's just
Yep.
not telling us, or they have no idea what is going on.
Yep. No,
Well,
that's a great point.
that alone could feed a cover up, to
Mhm.
be honest.
Oh, well, and there's a lot of there have been a number of people who've talked about a lot of certain conspiracy theories exist almost to comfort those who believe them. What's interesting is I think Norio doesn't necessarily begin his trek in the position that he has. Again, if you go back and watch the Conspiratologist, he's like, look, I kind of started on this path, and he was there at the beginning of the modern sort of conspiracy theory movement thing. So it's his exposure to the material that made him go, maybe something else is going on here. Like this math ain't mathin', right? Well, I guess we're gonna go ahead and jump to the end of his article, because Dark of the Moon video is asking the right question. It says, if the phenomenon is paranormal or spiritual in nature, then what entities might be behind it, and to what purpose? Dare we ask that? Well, yeah, I mean, that's literally the question he asks here at the end, right? He says, perhaps these manipulative entities, whoever or whatever they may be, could be testing our beliefs or convictions. These manipulators themselves may be using our beliefs and convictions as a psychological weapon of some sort, brainwashing some of the public that we cannot rely on proofs, but on real convictions alone. Perhaps our belief and convictions to them are more important for some strange reason or other. Could they play an important role in the events to come in the near future? He's straight there saying, look, hey, this is whatever these things are. It is clear that if they are paranormal, then our beliefs and our psychology may be far more important to them than any other thing. Like this, all of this may be a bigger con. And I think that's kind of the scarier concept. I'm working on a comic with a friend, and that's one of the things we're playing with, is this idea that, hey, the magician's over here saying, look at this, look at this, look at this, while he's doing this other thing over here, right? And so you see what he wants you to see. You believe the reality he's created for you. And as soon I think it was Penn Jillette, who said, magic is very, very stupid. Meaning, when you actually understand what the trick is, you're like, really? This whole time, it's this obvious thing, right? But that simple thing puts you in a place that gets your brain going. You're like, oh, I'm seeing something I'm not supposed. I can't possibly believe that I'm seeing. This all may be about belief. Everything else is the illusions that we get our minds going in a particular direction. And the scarier thing is, why does that matter to them? The fact that it matters to them, I think at this point, is kind of becoming apparent. So now the only question is why.
And to double down on that, why does it matter to them if it's them being the entities? Of course, why does it matter so much to the power establishment nowadays? Like, there's the new thing with Chucky Schumer pushing for more like UFO transparency, and they even use the word on the Democrats page, disclosure, again and again and again. It's not going to be any type of real disclosure, I don't think, but the idea that somehow we can have faith in this kind of totally entrenched government power structure to tell us the truth. And we talked about this extensively when the whistleblower story broke. I think both here talked about it on Jason McLean Questions Everything as well.
Oh, yeah.
The idea that when the whistleblowers are part of a very intentionally constructed mechanism to get the information out there, and when it travels along the communicative paths that you would expect it to, because it traveled along the same paths in 2017 when this story became world news, you have to really ask yourselves, what do the people in power want us to believe when this is a story now? So
Yep.
I think you can go from what do the entities, if there are entities, believe? What does the phenomenon believe? Certainly, Valet back in the day even suggested that it wasn't impossible because he'd read things like a briefing about a plan to project holograms over the air in Cuba to make them think that, I don't know, the second coming was at hand or something. Like there was
Yeah.
some CIA planned, and they had the technology allegedly to project things in the cloud. And I think we've seen video of things in China where cities are projected.
Oh
in the
yeah.
cloud, things, right?
It's nuts.
So the idea is, even, and Valet made that statement decades ago now. I mean,
Mhm.
the idea that is there some reason to develop this belief system, and be that entities, the way that perhaps Hayakawa's article tends to make us think, and that might be the case. There might be sentient entities behind this who want us to think a particular
Mhm.
way. But certainly there's also people who are manipulating the information and pushing certain narratives that we clearly can tell
Yeah.
without having to do a greater leap into beliefs in spiritualism or religion or esotericism, where we can see on Earth there seems to be at the moment a push for us to take this idea seriously. The idea of UFOs, which was essentially mocked
Mhm.
from 69 until 2017 by in any mainstream source, with the occasional exception. But for the most part, post-Condon Committee, nobody was talking about it seriously in the power elite until 2017, into the power structure of the world. I mean, it came out occasionally. Sure, you had Stephen Greer doing a press conference in like
Right,
2001.
of
You
course.
had these things
Mhm.
happening, but it wasn't a new front and center story. It
Yeah.
wasn't like, head senators of both parties, pushing through legislation to have
Mhm.
disclosure or a more transparent idea of what different government agencies know about the flying saucer phenomenon. Like, this is all very new. This is all new in the last 5 years, this new approach to it. And you
Yeah.
have to ask why. Do we believe politicians on both aisles just have wonderful goodwill and want us all to know the truth all of a sudden? Or is there some reason, perhaps, that now there is this shift towards changing the dialogue about UFOs?
Well, and I think there's this one of the great difficulties here is we don't really know where one ends and the other begins, right? Like we don't, if we're being 100% honest, we don't know how much is government disinformation, government manipulation, and where the genuine phenomena is. We know there is genuine phenomena, but how many? I hate saying this, but at this point, we just have to admit that it's a reality. How many people who've been abducted were actually taken by the government for some reason? Like how much of this phenomena is just they've exploited it? Like, well, it exists. We don't know what to do with it, but we can manipulate it. Which I think has been your thought is mostly it was just spun to cover their other behaviors, their other stuff, and I agree with that. I think they had a sterner hand on the on that from earlier on, but the simple fact of the matter is we don't know what they've used to cover their continuing of Nazi experimentation, which is what Operation Paperclip was at the end of the day. We think, oh, it's about missiles and satellites, and it's like, no. 2 episodes ago, we were talking about this, right? Guy Malone points out, nah, there's some stuff that we were doing post World War II where we were continuing their experimentation on people that at the time they thought wouldn't be missed. So the question becomes, when did everyone's like, oh, would they stop that? Really? Really? Why would you think that? Where's the evidence that they would have stopped any of that behavior?
And perhaps with abduction, some of it becomes more sophisticated than an actual government group going and physically abducting people. Although
Yeah.
certainly Rick Doty, who we've talked about multiple
Mhm.
times on this and on Talking Weird, who I've had as a guest on Talking Weird before we jump to the Untold Radio Network, the AFOSI agent at the head of, or the heart of, the Benowitz affair, and some would
Mhm.
say at the heart of much of modern UFO belief, everything from the MJ-12 documents to
Yeah.
Dulce underground bases to
Mhm.
Operation Serpo. All of this, people point at Doty being the front man
Yeah.
for. But Doty said later, he said it on my show on Talking Weird before we were here. He also said it on a Stephen Greer documentary, that he was aware of an AFOSI program that was using people who were disfigured or didn't look quite right as operatives to go and abduct people. And he said he believed that was probably still ongoing. But to even lay that level of story aside for a moment, it's quite possible that we're so sophisticated now, if as far as we want to get this message out, you just have to bombard the public with alien abduction narratives and imagery through Hollywood and science fiction. And then you have to encourage people who are suspicious or leaning that way anyway to go and hang out with an alien abduction therapist. And before you know it, they're on a couch remembering that they had this experience. So maybe you can actually, my point is, maybe you don't need to kidnap people out of their bedroom to foster the idea of an alien abduction in their mind. Maybe you just have to push them, give them a nudge with enough science fiction, enough X-Files, enough unsolved mysteries and everything else, so they go and visit a therapist, and then the therapist who specializes in this stuff, who could very well believe in it too, incidentally, is so invested in the story that when they have you under hypnosis, they push you in the right direction. I know for a fact that happened. I spoke when I was doing my PhD dissertation, and I'm not the only one who's spoken to abductees who've said similar things. I spoke at length with a very articulate abductee, and she was very convincing, and I'm sure she'd had genuine spiritual or psychic experiences which were beyond the physical realm. She said when she was working with the late Bud Hopkins, she said that she said, I had no recollection of what these things look like, none. And she still couldn't remember what they look like. But she said he pushed and he pushed and he pushed until I gave him the answer that I knew he wanted to hear. Little gray man, tear-shaped, inverted tear-shaped heads, big black eyes, and that became part of the narrative. Now, how often has that happened? Why is it that the Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs alien abductees have all these horrible experiences, while the people who went with the late John Mack from Harvard, who believed it was a positive experience, come out with all these spiritually enlightening experiences? So clearly there's an influence on the hypnotherapist, on the experiencer. But if we know it can point them in the direction of evil alien or good alien, and if we hear that type of narrative I just described, how much of the alien abduction phenomenon that has been remembered under hypnosis is just totally whole cloth fabricated stuff?
It's like you can read my mind, because that's literally where I was going to go. I can't get too close to the camera; it freaks out. But no, that's literally where I was going to go with this, because we think, oh, human experimentation, chemicals and implants and all these things, right? What if it's mental? MK Ultra never stopped. I mean, this is one of those things that we always think, oh, MK Ultra, that was when in the 60s they were trying to figure out if they could use, drugs and stuff to make secret super agents. That is the Hollywood line. That's all that is. That is entirely a Hollywood fiction. Yes, they were, of the projects we know, the idea of implanting memories or subconscious commands is something they were working on doing, but it wasn't the sole goal of this project. There was over 120 projects that we know of, but we only know of like a couple of them because everything was gone. But all of those psychiatrists, all of those they just kept doing their jobs at these major universities. And so when I say that the alien abduction phenomena could involve the government, I'm not thinking they've got some blimp decked out like a UFO. Some of this just may be, again, psychological warfare, conditioning, and that, to your point, the whole abduction phenomena may be something that they've pushed out there into the broader consciousness, so that people don't really remember what actually happened to them. Again, people have noted for years the connections between satanic ritual abuse and abduction phenomena. The stories, the how it, the hows and whys of how they work, they're virtually one for one. That's not a coincidence. Now, what you take from that, okay, open for debate, right? But at some level, we need to at least postulate, and just to get back to Norio's article, if we don't know what's every instance of what the true UFO thing is and which is this other thing out here, that blurs that line even more, making the question even harder to ask. But it is clear there is a real phenomena out there, and it is clear that it is far more interested in us and perhaps our spiritual lives, our psychology, our beliefs and convictions. It may be far more interested in that than anything else, and that we need to ask questions that I think a lot of people don't want to ask, because it leads you into an area of going, well, okay, maybe these things aren't what we think they are.
Yeah, back to Dark of the Moon video's point before and the end of Norio's article. I think Norio is implying, and I've spoken to Norio and I like him a lot, and I think he's almost on point with all of this stuff. I think Norio is implying that this might be what, for lack of a better term, would be demonic, would be a dark spiritual agency that was manipulating us intentionally. And even people like John Keel, who worked outside of any type of Christian cosmology, recognized that the UFO phenomenon and related other paranormal phenomena were, and as does Villay, incidentally, is deceptive, is manipulative, and damages people. So the idea that somehow this is, the John Mack position spiritually for our own good or something, when there's cases about lives being ruined and people actually being seriously injured and dying and all these other things, not to mention that there does seem to be a deceptive underpinning version. And Mothman Prophecies is a classic example, when Keel and other people are being told all these things are going to happen by the entities and nothing happens, or something slightly different happens, not quite what they said, and they were pointing you in the wrong direction. So there seems to be a history of deception and deceit with the phenomenon. If we can, and it's very hard to do, incidentally, but if we can somehow remove the phenomenon from Hollywood spin, from governments, cover up, from whatever else, if we can remove it and just look at the phenomenon itself, which again I think is almost impossible to do, but let's try for a minute. It seems to be deceptive. It seems to tell people things that don't happen. It seems to damage people. It seems to kidnap people. It seems to ruin lives, essentially. So if that's the case, it seems to be on a darker side of spiritual reality, whatever your religions or whatever your positions are. And so I think Norio's point is that perhaps this is essentially, again, in Christian terminology, something that's demonic.
Which Dark of the Moon has a great point here. It says, but what if it's not the government at all? Look at the parallels between fairy stories and UFO phenomena. We have talked about that a lot on the show. Like, that's, I mean, the long-standing listeners are going, yeah, that's what they think, and we do. I mean, straight out, we've done the history of this phenomena, and 100 years ago, 200 years ago, it was the Fae. You go back, it was the elves, it was the Jinn, it was the Leshy. It's the same. It is clearly the same phenomena. The only reason I'm bringing up MK Ultra, and we don't know which one is the government, what isn't, is that because we don't have a clear delineation because of government shenanigans, right? We don't know which is which all the time. With the UFO things, it's kind of clear when it's one of theirs 9 times out of 10 versus something genuinely unusual. There's a lot of people who point out even the whole Tic Tac videos and the gimbal footage may be our material, and everything's, oh, you mean like a probe or like a drone or something. People have come up with a lot of people said, no, we have the ability to create, essentially called it plasma, but essentially the best way to think of it is it's radar and infrared spoofing, that we can create things they literally aren't there, right? And as far as every machine you've got says there's something there, and that's why it was created, was to, and that we were testing out on ourselves to figure out if it worked, right? If it genuinely worked. So, but yeah, our broader point here is the stuff that's genuinely unusual. It does go back all the way. It's always been the way, which means either this phenomena is trying to hide its true identity the entire time, or our perception of it is influencing how it appears, right? And that's, which goes back to, okay, there is an interplay to Valet's point, to Hayakawa's point, to our points, our understandings, our beliefs seem to be central to this phenomena interacting with us. And to your point, this is, again, I've written about this since 2014. I think a lot of this is demonic, just straight up. I think the truly bizarre, the stuff that isn't as easily written off as government material, like this stuff is absolutely of a demonic origin, because to your point, look at what it does. Look at what it attacks. Look at how it behaves. This is not, this is something bigger and darker, and it wants us to perceive it in a particular way. And again, if it's lying to you, then it ain't on your side. That's my general thought. People who love you, people who care for you, they will tell you the truth, even if it's going to hurt your feelings or you don't like it. People who don't have your best intentions at heart, they'll lie to you all day.
Yeah, the problem with the UFO phenomenon, the UFO experience, the UFO belief system, is the entire field is just loaded with deceit. It's loaded with, I think, self-deceit, where we see something in the sky which is just Venus or a satellite and we want to believe it's a UFO. It's loaded with intentional deceit of things like the Benowitz affair, which AFOSI operated and led a citizen of the United States to believe that there was a genuine alien incursion happening, and then pushed it out, and then that got pushed out into the broader UFO belief system. It's loaded with the deceit of the phenomenon itself, which gets back to Norio's point. So it's so hard to take any of this stuff at face value. And I think if there's any through line of this show, like you said, and any through line of Talking Weird, and any through line of any of the work I've done since my dissertation, it's that you can't trust your expectations, and you can't even trust your perceptions when it comes to really any paranormal belief. But let's stay with UFOs, because we're so wired to assume now that it's extraterrestrial, that there's little gray men or whatever they are in the craft, and that there's an MJ-12 US government in cohorts with the aliens, and there's secret craft back engineered from crashed Roswell sources in Area 51. And all of this has become such a part of the cultural zeitgeist that you can't even think about flying saucers or UFOs or UAPs without being flooded with this type of belief system, and let alone if you're actually experiencing something. And if it is, as you're suggesting, and I think you're dead on, if it's somehow reflecting our preconceived notions back to us, or even presenting culturally as the world expects now, or even if it's what Greg Bishop suggested, some type of co-creation mechanism where it's putting something in and we're putting something in, and there's a blend and a new reality. Whatever the case is, the level of deception throughout this means that you know what I feel like? I feel like I'm the little gray. I feel like I'm the Air Force officer in the gray alien outfit in Jose Chung's From Outer Space.
I love that episode.
Yeah, telling Mulder, I can't tell you even I'm real. I can't tell you what's real. And that's it's such shaky territory that we're standing on whenever we walk into the UFO arena, that anybody who tries to assure you that they know what the reality is so contaminated But
Yeah.
I'm not even sure there's a way out. It's like a tar baby. You get a hold of it and then it doesn't let you go, and you become further enmeshed in it before it's part of you and you're part of it, and there's nowhere to go.
Yeah. No, 100%. Again, I love that episode so much. And that scene where that diner scene is, I think, gold, because it's, again, everything seems to be put in, again, there's this ideology it's created, and anything outside of it, it's, you know, it is almost religiously protected. Just 100%. And it's dangerous because again, I think you have a great line that says belief is the problem, or belief is the enemy, right?
That's John Keel's just stolen.
Right. Well, if you're going to steal from somebody, you might as well steal.
Oh, all I do is steal from John Keel. The title of my documentary, The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers, about Raymond Palmer.
Yep.
It's a total Keel thievery. At least I'm honest when I steal from him.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Keel, I'm stealing this.
Yep. So real quick, I want to get to some of y'all's questions because they were great. I want to address Horace's first one because his question here, he says, how much is neither government nor demon but the way our minds react to their changing physical and psychological environment? Are we our own deceivers? I think that absolutely plays a part of it. Look, I'm here to tell you,
sometimes
most of the encrypted accounts I get, particularly pictures, it is all in their head. It is 100% in their head. People who are, those of us who've done paranormal investigations, they one of the things a lot of us, figured out, and the TAPS guys are the ones who really pioneered this looking into this phenomena because of their history, is things like electromagnetic fields from wiring that's not put together correctly. It can create hot spots, and because of that field, your brain makes you think you're being watched. Our brains are highly susceptible to electromagnetic waves. So, and this is something we've talked about on the show. We don't know, again, it's right, because we ain't got the Spookatron 5000 patent pending. We don't know what's what, which goes back to Norio's point. How much of this is us? Your point, how much of this is cultural contamination? How much of this is that? We don't really have a good way of saying what's what yet.
And to qualify what I said to Horace Smith then when I said sometimes, to his excellent point, that's not fair. Probably most of the time. I think there is something anomalous going on, and I do think there's government spin going on. But probably, yeah, I'm comfortable to say more than 90% of sightings and experiences are us just self-deluding ourselves because we've all drunk so much of the Hollywood sci-fi Kool-Aid that we have an expectation of what this thing's going to look like.
Yep. Nancy asks if we think there are demons who have been here or are higher archdemons just here for hard times. Yes. I think of it as an ecosystem, right? I think we use the word demon very naively. That's my thought. I think that there are beings that do have high, they move when they choose to move in the ways they choose. I think there's a whole ecosystem, right? Just like there's krill and whales, there's all kinds of things of differing powers and authorities and possibly even intentions. So
I do think that you can explain most of the genuine aspects of this, if you wanted to, with a Christian eschatology or cosmology. And I think people like Michael Heiser were very good at setting the groundwork for people then to run with beyond Heiser and say, well, if we've misunderstood the nature of the spiritual world, it's far more complicated, and demons aren't what we thought they were anyway, there's something else.
Yep.
And a lot of this, the type of suggestion that Nancy made, does fit into that type of eschatology, that type of end times eschatology, or that type of just broader Christian demonology or cosmology.
Yep. For a few questions that are slightly more lighthearted to end the episode. Again, this one's from Horace, but again, as an astronomy nerd, I really appreciated this. He says, were I running a sky research for UFOs, I would use at least 2 cameras. If both work, one could get a parallax. If both fail simultaneously, that is interesting too. Yes. And that goes back to one of the things we've all discussed. Again, as those of us who've been out in the field, we've researched for a lot of these cryptozoological animals. Everything fails or goes wonky at the same time. Like I know a lot of people are like, okay, well, we can draw this from this. I'm like, whoa. The only thing you can really draw from that is it all went weird at the same time, which tells you the phenomena is affecting this material. It absolutely is. But yeah, it does absolutely happen. But that's a great idea. I think people should do it because the parallax would allow you to gauge size, distance, true relative speed. Like you said, if it affects both of them, that's telling.
Can I just say a little funny anecdote because of Horace's suggestion? Whenever people want to double down on their ETH, their belief in the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and how it seems the rational, most likely, whatever, version, I can't help but think of Donald Kehoe's plan that I believe it was in his book Aliens from Space. I think it wasn't in one of his first, it was maybe book number 5 or something. He wrote so many, but he honestly proposed something called, I think it was Operation or Project Lure. And his plan was to build a fake flying saucer out in the middle of nowhere and have hidden cameras that they'd be monitoring. And then the UFO people would land, be drawn to this fake flying saucer and go in and investigate it because it was like something that they knew. And of course, what it was like just cargo cultism, like crazy natives in Papua New Guinea. The crazy white gods from the sky gave them food from their weird aerial mobiles. So we'll build thatched versions of their planes and look to the skies, and maybe the gods will return. The idea that extraterrestrials were going to land and park their saucer next to your fake one and go in there. And this was something seriously proposed by the leading ETH guy in this country, in the world, for probably the better part of like 30, 40 years. Yeah, sometimes ETH needs to step back from the physical, certainty of the reality of this thing. And there's no better example than Operation Lure.
I love that idea because you're right. That is straight up cargo cult stuff. That is exactly like, seriously, you think we would like, you think your any model that you could make would trick them and be like, hey, one of our spaceships has crashed. You think they wouldn't know the difference? Like, they're not ducks, right? I mean,
it's unbelievable. And it shows the religiosity, by the way, of ETH, which pretends to paint itself always scientifically with this scientific brush. When that's the best model you could have come out of the leading thinker in the 60s or whenever he wrote that book, when that was your best way forward. And no offense, I mean, I'm sure Kehoe was a nice man and did some good work and everything.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But he was so lost in this belief system, as most people who are in the ETH are. It doesn't matter. People who are in any belief system, again, belief is the enemy. It's hard to shake somebody out of the grip of a certainty of what this thing is. That's why I try to stay a little bit flexible with the UFO things. As David was saying before, the fairy thing is totally legitimate. We might have, or as Horace was saying, this might all be a delusion. This might be the Christian version of, this might be the devil or demons or whatever messing with us. It might be a simulation theory throwing in a simulation system, throwing in weird, glitches to either let us see a way out or to keep us trapped in here. It's so easy to fall into a belief system when you look at UFOs. And the ETH is the most, I think, seductive because it has been the one which has been given the most support by decades of Hollywood and television shows and books and documentaries and everything else. That's the one people lead to. And it's just such a silly path to go down. Unless you want to start building a UFO in your backyard and maybe the ETs will land and you'll be able to film them because that was key.
Or, you could just go out into the desert and chant with laser lights because
that's the new version. Same thing, man. Just a different version of that. It's the same thing.
Yep. Ed Schultz says, I love the old photos of ectoplasm. Gross. Interesting point. The ectoplasm, more often than not, was created with cotton. Because again, you notice the whole ectoplasm thing disappears after by World War I, all those photos are basically gone. Well, because the camera technology got better. and it was they were things created with cotton. That's usually how they were able to generate. Again, most of them, other people used other things, but cotton was the most used to get that effect. I would like to end on this one. Little Solecism, Solecism says, do you really want clear photos of an alien anal probe? Yes. Do you know how much money we would make? Seriously, how much money we would be set for life with those photos? That's all I'm saying. Or get a couple of videos on there. I'm saying scientific, crowd would pay for it, and then you got the freaks on the internet who would pay out the nose for those videos. So yeah, I think we do.
I'm not even going to touch that one, Jason.
Did you ever see did I ever send you the Saturday Night Live skit they did of the woman who was the three people who were talking about being abducted by aliens, and two of them were having the light being, consciousness. The other one was abducted by the Greys. Have you ever seen that skit?
No, you'll have to send it to me. Hilarious.
I will send it to you as soon as we're done with this episode. It is the greatest thing. I laugh stupidly hard every single time I watch that video. It's nuts. But on that note, thank you, Dean. This was a great episode, and I really thank you because you introduced me to the world of Norio Hayakawa, and I have not been let down. I appreciate that.
Well, you suggested this one tonight. It was a great suggestion, Jason. So, thumbs up to you, my friend.
Well, and thumbs up to Norio for creating it, because this was a great article. Because again, the thing that I've really come to appreciate about with Norio's work is he's going to ask questions that nobody wants to ask, usually on both sides of any issue, right? He's like, well, okay, well, hold on, but what about all this over here? And because he's been around for so long, he's got a lot of life experience. He's like, hold on, I've heard all this before. I've done all this before, but it was packaged this way this time. And now it's being packaged this way that time. He's going to bring that stuff up, which is why again, guys, once you're done here, go see The Conspiratologist. If you haven't seen, it's like a 30-minute film. It's very short. Follow him. He's got great material. I can't proclaim his amazingness enough.
Yeah, and as Jason said before, the link to the article we were talking about tonight is in the show notes. Mm-hmm. But then that'll take you to his blog, and you can see all of the other things that Norio's investigated and thought about and written about. So it's worth checking out that site regularly.
Yep, absolutely. On that note, we will see you all next week behind the card catalog. Be good.